Hi everyone. Before we start the episode, I just wanted to let you know that we actually also filmed this episode, which is really important for the subject matter. So if you'd like to watch this episode, you can go to YouTube and search for the Lunatics Project, or head to lunaticsproject.com and click on video. Enjoy! Hello, everybody. I'm Abby from the Lunatics Radio Hour podcast, where we explore the history of horror and sometimes the paranormal. So today I am very, very excited to be joined by my friend Grace. We actually went to high school together. We've known each other for a super long time. And Grace reached out to us because she lives in this gorgeous historic home. And she's also had some pretty intense paranormal experiences here along with her family. So we're going to talk about it and show you guys the home, and we'll see what comes from it. Hi, Grace.
Hi.
Thanks for sitting down and talking with us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
So, to start off, you texted me and said, "My house is haunted, come interview me."
Yeah.
Tell us, okay, well, before we get into the haunting, what year was your house built?
1725.
And how did you find out the history of all of this?
So, my dad lives a mile down the road.
Okay.
And the woman who renovated the house, so it was like a shack, basically, like totally run down. Her name was Gloria, and she was just like a neighborhood icon. So when I saw the house for the first time, my dad knew exactly where the house was, and the house has a reputation, so he immediately knew it was Gloria's house. He like knew some information, which I'll get to in a little bit, about like what happened when the house was rebuilt.
Okay.
And it was I think the previous owners also, it was like in the listing that it's a 1725 house.
Right. Very cool. Okay, and so at some point the house got renovated again.
Yeah.
When did that happen?
So Gloria was like a hobby antique rebuilder. So she rebuilt this house, she rebuilt that house, and I think she also worked on some other houses in the area.
Cool.
So in 1998, she had the entire house lifted off the foundation, disassembled, post and beam disassembled. The concrete foundation was re-poured, and then the house was put back together. But the cool part is that the Smithsonian actually, they handled like the dig. So they excavated the foundation, right? Maybe like 3 feet around the foundation as well or whatever. And they took a bunch of artifacts to the Smithsonian.
So how did they know to do that? Is it a protected house?
So it's not a protected house. I don't know exactly why. I think maybe it lost its protection when the foundation was rebuilt.
Right.
It's not like a historic home. I've tried to find it like on the historic registry, and it's not. But like all of the houses on this street are of that era, and none of them are historic homes. Cove used to be like a shipping center.
Yeah.
Huge schooners would come down in colonial times. I know, you would never think, right?
No.
And then they trestled it off to build the railroad.
I see.
And when they built the railroad trestle, I guess it prevented any of the schooners from coming in.
Yeah.
And somehow over time, the water has gotten like lower and lower and lower.
Got it. Wow.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
So we've picked up some of the information about the house. Like that house, I think, is like 1837 over there. We've picked up information about the house mostly from people who've been here for a really long time.
Yeah. Super cool. Okay, so when the Smithsonian came, what did they find?
So just to clarify, I've been told it was the Smithsonian, but I believe it was the Connecticut Historical Society.
Okay.
Because I called the Smithsonian.
You
and
did?
because I'm like, I want to know. And I even we have boxes of artifacts that were left behind that are all labeled.
Yeah.
And it includes like an inventory file.
Okay.
And I even researched the men who did the excavation to see if I could find them, and I can't find anything. So I know it was excavated because I have the boxes that are like professionally done, obviously
and
done and labeled and indexed. Yeah. But I can't actually find the record of it. Okay. So,
but whoever came, some official historical society came.
Somebody fancy.
Yeah, and what did they find?
So I think it's really old Pequot land. So I was telling you when you came, like you can like kick a rock and you'll find an arrowhead or like an old apothecary bottle, because it was Pequot land, but it was also obviously colonized and taken, and this house was built, and the Pequots were decimated.
Yeah.
But in these boxes, they have like creepy shoes, like that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And then they have like, you know, arrowheads, pottery, all of that, like,
Very
you know,
cool.
pretty much everything that you can imagine. There's some bones in there too.
Human bones?
So I don't know if there's human bones in those boxes, but there's definitely bones in there.
Okay.
When we bought the house, we like found out the history of the house a little bit, just how old it was, right? It was like a feature for us because we like old stuff.
Yeah.
And then when we were at the closing, the people we bought the house from, they said, just so you know, there's these boxes that we left in the basement that if you ever sell the house, those boxes need to stay with the house. Like they're technically part of the house. So they have to stay there, and they're there for you. Okay. And they're full of artifacts and whatever. Yeah. And I was like, oh, cool. So is the house like really haunted or what?
Yeah.
And they were like, no. We did find a human skull though.
In the house?
So I was like, like, okay, can we get a little more detail on that? And she said basically when they had this huge pine tree in the woods over there, or in the yard on the other side of the house that they wanted removed. And when they removed it, they found human remains. We thought that they were fucking with us at the time because it's a house closing. So we were like, oh, okay, like there's bones, right? Then we go home and we see there's bones in the boxes too. Yeah, so we were like, okay, that's kind of weird. That's a cemetery. And that's
just that part of your yard.
Yes.
Wow.
And that the garage was the chapel site.
Wow.
Which makes sense because in the front of the chapel, there's something in the ground that I'll show you. Okay. That's a circle of stones, like an old well. Oh. That's dug into the ground and kind of covered. Okay. So that's the lore. Is that that was a cemetery. I don't know what this house, if it was just like the rectory or something, but apparently that was the chapel.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's super interesting.
Yeah, we'll go check that out. So tell me about the basement here.
So it's like I think there's a name for it, but it's just a half basement. Okay. It's really not, there's not really very much that's significant about it. Okay. So I think
I guess when they re-poured the foundation, it's now just a modern foundation.
Yeah, exactly.
And what elements of the house, before we get into the fun stuff, are there pieces that are updated and new and pieces that are still original?
Yeah, so like this side of the house was the original house, right? Like the tall side of the salt box.
Yeah.
And then this came later, but I don't know when it came. We could probably look at aerial pictures and see exactly like when it came. So you saw the post and beam inside. The post and beam is all original, and all of the wood in this side of the house, like that really dark wood. Yeah. I think it's chestnut, which is essentially extinct now. Right. And so that wood is very precious wood. And very, very old, and it ages so nicely. So I think pretty much everything in that side of the house is obviously original. All the drywall is new. You know, like that all got redone. I think all the electric got redone.
Sure. The plumbing.
And then they put in like some fun other like modern things. Yeah.
It's very beautiful. Yeah. You live here with your husband and your 2 kids.
Yeah.
Coming into living here, were you someone who believed in the paranormal?
So this is an interesting question. So no, I wasn't really. I mean, I did, like I was like spooked by it and I liked it, but I wasn't that into it. Okay. Before we moved into the house, I met with this astrologer and I got my chart done. And he said like it was like a 2-hour thing, you know. And I have a recording of it if you ever want to listen to it.
Yeah, that's cute.
Because one of the things that he said when he read Frances's chart is that she sees spirits.
Your daughter.
My daughter.
Yeah.
And that she's going to be surrounded by gardens.
Wow.
So then when we saw the house, we were like, oh shit, there's gardens like everywhere.
Yeah.
Like this is really, that's like an interesting coincidence, right? Mm-hmm. So, but no, I had never really experienced anything, definitely not at the level that I experienced it in the house when I moved in. So
what made you decide to meet with an astrologer? Just for fun?
Yeah. I had just had my daughter, my sister like got her chart done, and I was just, curious.
Yeah, cool. Mm-hmm. And is your husband skeptical?
Very.
Yeah.
Okay. But then certain things will happen, and I'll be like, so what do you make of that, Mark? And he's just like, he puts it into a box of things he can't explain, and he just ties the box
up. And
that's
what it is.
And that's it. And so, but then he also has experiences like, and then I'm like, how do you explain that, honey? And he's like, I don't know. And he's had fewer experiences than Frances and I have had. He's only really had 2 things that he's you know?
Yeah.
Well, maybe 3. But, yeah, 2 or 3 things. Francis and I, it's like dozens of things.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So how long have you lived here for?
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
And tell us the first time you felt like something strange happened to you here.
I think the first time Mark was traveling to D.C., it was February 2020. Just before the pandemic. We'd only been in the house for like 3 months. My son was not even close to born yet.
Okay.
That was like 2 years away or something, or a year and a half away. So I was laying in bed and I woke up with sleep paralysis, which I had never had sleep paralysis before ever.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming it was sleep paralysis, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Which nobody fucking knows, right?
Hard to pin down.
Yeah. So
But one of those things that spans almost every culture.
Yes. And the next thing that happened also is I've heard so many stories like this, which was I was looking up, and this is so, I'm going to be looking at Alan to see how he reacts, but there was green smoke that was forming over my head. I couldn't move. And it formed directly over my face, and it was a man's face. And I screamed and broke myself out of sleep paralysis because I gasped so loud when I saw it. And it didn't disappear. The same way that it came together, it floated apart.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it was crazy.
And intense.
Yeah.
So you were laying in bed when this happened, and you felt stuck before you kind of broke yourself out of it.
I mean, it happened it took like 10 seconds. And I don't know if it was sleep paralysis or it was just that I was like frozen in fear.
Yeah.
But I was awake after. I didn't wake up after.
Right.
I was awake. I covered my head.
Yeah.
And stayed under the covers until the morning, and that was it.
It was a man's face you didn't recognize, I assume. Do you still remember what it looks like? So if someday you saw a photo or something, you could be like, that looks familiar.
Yeah.
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 Okay, that's like a bang. That's like starting off
with
a
bang.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I had, in rapid succession, 3 more episodes of sleep paralysis, and then they completely stopped.
Wow.
And they were escalating.
Yeah.
So, and then there were some things happening with Francis simultaneously.
Okay.
When we first moved into the house, everything was really potent. Like, it was just very intense.
Yeah.
And it tapered off a lot since then. But the next episode of sleep paralysis, I was laying in bed and sideways. This one was less dramatic, but I saw 2 people standing in the corner of my room, 2 little boys standing in the corner of my room, 2 blonde little boys, weirdly enough, just their outlines.
Weird.
And they were inside of my shelves, which was very strange.
Yeah.
And this time I stared at them for, who knows how time works when you're like in a different state of consciousness, but I stared at them for what felt like 10 minutes before they were gone.
Like a significant amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like see-through or opaque?
They were like black.
Black.
Yeah.
But you could tell they were blonde.
Yeah.
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 No, yeah.
Sounds really crazy.
No.
So the next thing that happened was I had a normal night's sleep, and I woke up the next morning, and sometime in the afternoon, I remembered that someone had been holding my hand in the night. And it was such a distinct feeling. Yeah. And I even could remember what position my hand was in, and I knew that somebody had been holding my hand. All right.
That's sort of nice.
It felt very friendly. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Whatever this is, I don't think it intends to scare me. Right. And okay.
Yeah.
But I also was sort of like, I don't really appreciate being touched without consent.
Yeah, fair.
So like, I was like, okay. And I told Mark, and it was like, oh, that's weird. Mark at that time, he had woken up in the middle of the night and sensed something in the room. That was his big thing, was like he could feel like primally that there was something in the room. So the next time that I had the sleep paralysis, this was the final time that it happened, and then I started to get really serious about what was going on. I started to really like think about it, and feel a little more protective. Yeah. Because at that time I was like very curious, right? Yeah. Like I was having sleep paralysis a little bit. I felt like I was interacting with something. The next time that the sleep paralysis happened, Mark had let me sleep in because I think Francis had been up the night before, so I was let me sleep in. That sounds so like patriarchal, but we like alternate sleeping in, right? So I was sleeping in, and I could hear Francis and Mark opened my door, and I couldn't move. I was like really out. I could hear them open my door. I heard my cat come in and like purr around my feet, go out, heard them go out. And then I felt somebody grab my ankles and pull me off of my bed, which was the most bizarre thing, right? I could feel like the sheet up against my face. I could hear it. I was really scared.
Yeah.
I didn't like know what it was, right?
Yeah.
And then when I opened my eyes were open,
Yeah.
right? But I was still at the top of my pillow.
Yeah.
And I couldn't move, and then it happened again. Something grabbed my ankles and pulled me off the bed.
Oh my God.
And again, when I opened my eyes, I was back at the top.
Just like deja, like back to back.
Yeah,
to back.
it happened 3 times. And I've heard stories like this, other people before having something
pulling off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it felt like I was being pulled out of my body.
Right.
It was very bizarre. And when I got out of bed, I sort of stopped and I thought, okay, if I can just get to my phone.
Yeah.
Because I was totally lucid. I was like, if I can get to my phone, I can text Mark and he can come help me because I couldn't speak. And so I was on my bed like this. And I knew in order to get to my phone, I had to be able to move my hand. Yeah. And they say that's how you get out of sleep paralysis. You focus on like moving your fingers.
Yeah.
So that I was very slowly able to move my fingers and then my wrist and then get out of bed. It's fucking crazy.
I want to pause on that because that's like the first I've heard. So sleep paralysis is very often associated with like crushing or being pulled, right, in the dropping. But to have it happen 3 times in a row and like the way you described it as like being pulled out of your body, like I've never heard. That's like such a fascinating way to think about and terrifying way to think. Like half astral projection, half like.
So I'm so glad you said that.
Okay.
Because I instinctually knew that I was being called to astral project, and I know that sounds fucking crazy.
I'm with you.
But
there.
I had this really intuitive understanding that the sleep paralysis was the first stage in this layered reality.
Yeah.
And I felt like I am being invited to enter another dimension.
Right.
That seriously is how I felt. It sounds wild.
No.
I was like, I'm being invited to enter another dimension, and I'm being kind of pulled there against my will. And I don't really feel good about that. And that's why I was like, I want to stop this.
Yeah.
Because if I want to experiment with different layers of consciousness, I want to make sure that I'm doing it on my own terms. I don't want anybody forcing me to. It just feels uninvited. Yeah. And then I was listening to something that was just like, you can get lost in the astral plane, which is again very woo-woo, I know, but you can get lost there, and there, from what I understand, there's like hundreds of unexplained sleep deaths every year. Mm-hmm. So I was sort of like, I'm not really into that, and I feel like that whatever this is, it felt like it started really playful and light, and it just feels like it's getting more and more
forceful.
Yeah, and just like rude.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I started to think about what I was going to do to dispel this.
Okay.
And I like talked to some like witchy friends who gave me some good advice, which I followed, which was like put flowers in the basement, move the furniture around, play loud music, and speak directly to the spirit and tell it to leave.
Like a shifting of energy, is that the idea behind that
and
stuff?
also just like, it's deriving power from fear, and so if you can establish that you're not afraid, you just talk to it. So Mark and I started talking to it every day.
Okay.
And telling it to get the fuck out.
Yeah.
Basically, get the fuck out of my house. Don't touch me. Don't try to scare me. And it stopped the sleep paralysis.
Okay.
But there was other things that it started to manifest in like different ways.
I'm going to pause also to just say we are doing this interview outside of the house, not just because it's beautiful, but because Grace and her family have a rule where we don't talk about the house in the house.
Yeah.
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 It feels important to say right now.
Yeah. Like Mark got locked out the other day. He has no idea how he got locked out because we have all like turn locks.
Yeah.
And he came in and he was like, how the fuck did that happen? And I was like, don't talk about it. Just like leave it. You don't give it any energy. And give it any energy because it's fucking with us. Yeah. The same thing I told you about right? Like I dropped this. Did I tell you that?
The weed whacker?
Yeah, I dropped the thing and I'm just like, all right, it's like, it wants attention.
Right.
And I don't know.
You try not to give it attention.
You just don't know what you're messing with.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you don't.
So like around the same time, Frances started, that's when I think around like 18 months probably, she started talking about things in the house, which I thought was really interesting. She didn't know anything about, like when we moved in, my dad, when she was less than 1, my dad maybe said that was Auntie Gloria's house, right? But we didn't regularly talk about Auntie Gloria.
Yeah.
And she started saying that Auntie Gloria was coming to see her at night.
And Auntie Gloria is the local woman who redid this house.
She lived in the house. She died in Frances's room.
Okay.
So she started to say Auntie Gloria's totally, I swear to God, Abby, you've known me for like 20 years.
I have.
Totally right? Like, Auntie Gloria came to see me last night. She played with my toys. She told me you need to put your cakes in the oven right when you make the batter. Stop letting them sit out. She told me she wants you to paint the house red again.
The first time Frances comes to you and says the name Auntie Gloria, what do you feel like?
I was like, I looked at Mark and I was like, what the fuck? And then I said to Frances, I probed her a little bit, the same way you saw me like probe her in there, just like, oh, is she nice?
Yeah.
You know, what does she look like?
Yeah.
And just like really keep it very like, I didn't say anything like she's not real because I don't believe that. But, and if we had talked about her, we never said Auntie Gloria. So the auntie thing was kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
So I pull up her obituary and I didn't say anything to Frances. This was like the next day. I just put it in front of Frances. And my mouth to God's ears, she pointed to the picture and said, hey, it's Auntie Gloria. I was like,
wow.
And once we started to give it a little like, I think she picked up on our reaction.
Yeah.
She totally backed off of it.
Frances
She was not down to talk about it, and like she didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, she started to conflate Auntie Gloria with her other imaginary friends, which are obviously imaginary.
Yeah, yeah.
But of course, we come to find out the house used to be brick red, like, and Gloria had painted it the original color, which was like a very specific shade of red that was, because in order to have a historic home, it has to be certain colors.
Yeah.
She had done a lot of research to make sure it was the perfect shade of red.
Right.
So when they painted the house black, it was like a neighborhood. Everybody in the neighborhood was like, are you kidding me? Like, after all that Gloria did to make sure the house was the right shade. So that was wild.
So Frances, out of nowhere, before you even knew that, was like, Gloria wants you to paint the house back to the red. Yeah. And then you corroborated that later. Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
That's crazy.
And then she would say other stuff that was just straight up little kid creepy. Like, she'd be like, the lady with the black eyes came to see me.
That's terrifying.
Yep. Or like, the lady in the bath comes to see me at night. When mommy comes, she runs away.
Does she feel afraid?
I don't think so.
Wow.
She's never said anything. So the most recent time that she saw something was like less than 2 months ago. And she was scared that time. She told me about it and she was scared. So when we put the obituary in front of Frances and she pointed out the picture of Gloria, it says in the text, lovingly known by everyone in the neighborhood as Auntie Gloria, which we had obviously never, ever said to her before.
So just another layer of validation.
Yeah.
And was that something that gave your husband, the skeptic, a little bit of pause?
Yeah, so then I said to Mark, like, oh, what do you make of that, honey?
Right.
And he was just kind of like, yeah, that's fucking insane.
Yeah.
That's wild. He had no explanation. He was like, I guess she sees Auntie Gloria.
Yeah. Something we were just talking about, too, is like, to me, that experience of validating something, like having your daughter come to you, say something that you were very easily able to like look up, not only by picture, by the red house painting thing, and by the name, the specific name. So you validate it in 3 ways, gives power and validity to everything else.
Even the cake thing to me was bizarre.
The cake thing?
Because when Frances said, like, Gloria says you shouldn't leave your cakes out. And I was like, that's interesting. And it's true, right? I Googled it. And it's like, you're supposed to, you don't let them sit in the pans. You should put them in right away.
And you've been letting them sit in the pans. Yeah.
So, the one thing that gives me pause about that is that I don't know if I personally believe that people communicate after death. Right. So what I was thinking there was, this is like, maybe it needs to be cut out, I don't know. But I was like, I think that this is something impersonating Gloria. I don't see any reason why she would still be here. I just don't see any reason. She's got no unfinished business. She's not, what purpose would she have here?
Right.
So that, to me, I was sort of like, Frances, if you see something, you command your space. Like, you tell something that you don't want to be touched, or if you don't want to talk to somebody, you can tell them that. Because I felt a little like...
skeptical.
Well, that's a school of thought, right? Like, in the paranormal world, is that ghosts, human ghosts are not real. It's like fucking demons and shit that are tricking you.
Yeah.
And I felt tricked when it started really friendly, and then it felt like there was something else that was underneath that was not as friendly. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. It also makes sense too, because you and Mark were very clearly like, no, leave, and then there's a tactic shift, right?
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. It was very weird. So I started to hear whistling, which was weird.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't just hear it at the house. I would hear it everywhere. Like, I would go for a remote hike and I'd hear whistling and be like, and it seems so innocuous. Like, it seems like, oh, well, it was a bird. It was definitely not a bird. I know it seems like a small detail.
No, it doesn't.
But I've learned since that this is a very common thing that people experience, is hearing whistling, and that it's an old native, like an old wives' tale.
Yeah.
Dating back to Native Americans, that you should never whistle by yourself.
Which is funny, because when we were setting up here,
I
started whistling, and you were like, don't whistle. And I had never heard it before. I whistle all the time. Now
I guess it's supposed to be some kind of an invitation. Maybe you should fact check that. But that's what I understand. So,
and when you heard whistling, was it a similar tune, or was it always different? Or
it's just really meandering. Yeah, just like a meandering tune.
Yeah.
And and then things at the house. I think that things at the house sort of slowed down at that time, for a little while. Like, maybe for like 6 months, things were very low key. Once I started doing all my like rituals. And, Frances stopped saying that people were seeing her. She may have said like one or two other little things, but like nothing huge. And then something happened. Like, things started to pick back up, and I think that this is the next thing there was the flies in the bathroom, which was really weird. So there was a swarm, which at the time I didn't think about.
Yeah.
I was like, this is fucking disgusting.
Right.
Like, we have like an infestation. But then I thought about it afterward, and I was like, oh, that's something that people talk about.
How many
Swarming.
flies?
I'm talking thousands.
Thousands of flies.
Thousands. Like, I took bleach in the bathroom and sprayed everything.
Yeah.
And then I put stuff in the drains, and I like tried to seal everything up. It was the weirdest thing.
Just in one room.
One room, just in the bathroom. And I walked in, and I was like, holy shit. Like, I got Mark. I'm like, we have a fucking fly problem now? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
They say people who are possessed by demons are followed by flies. So then sometime around like August, William still was not born. I was newly pregnant with William. And we were all sitting in my living room. I was in the kitchen, and my husband and my daughter were in the living room. And they were like playing like roughhousing. And I heard Mark growl really, really loud at Frances. And then I heard Frances say, what was that? And I said, that was Daddy. And then just kept doing the dishes. And then I heard it again really, really loud in the middle of the room. And Frances said, what was that? And Mark said, that was Mom. And I turned around and I said, you're fucking with me, right? That was you.
Yeah.
And he said, and then we looked at each other. We kind of had this realization at the same time that there was a disembodied growl in the middle of the living room, because it was so obviously in the room, and it was so fucking loud and so human that we were like, we were both sussing out if we were joking, right?
And you have your two kids watch, or your
just
Frances watching you.
Frances then completely burst out crying. And she's like, what was that noise? What was that noise? And then Mark was like, he was just trying to calm her down. So he was like, it was just the grill. Like, something wrong with the grill.
Right.
Everything's fine, right?
Yeah.
And she's adamant, that was not the grill, Daddy. Like, that was not the grill. There's no way that was the grill. And at this point, she's only 18 months old. So, she was only 18 months, which is crazy, because she was talking so much at that time, which William was not like that. He took forever to talk. So we were really freaked out by that, but we just did our, like, whatever, like, stop, talk to it, stop, go away. And then the weird, like, tie-up to that story was, like, Halloween. So on Halloween, we went trick-or-treating. I would say grocery shopping. We went trick-or-treating. Probably went grocery shopping too. We went trick-or-treating, and we go to this place that has this incredible, like, they go all out, right? They have, like, all the statues and all the decorations. And we walk past this statue, not making any noise. Yeah. And it's got this it's all creepy, right? And Francis goes, "That's the grill." Daddy, it's the grill. Mark was with me at the time when we were just like, I was like, Mark, explain. Right. Explain. How is she making this connection? Nobody is telling her to say this stuff.
And it didn't growl. It was just visually.
No noises.
She was
just
like,
visually she was connecting that noise. Yes.
That's the grill.
Yeah. It was so weird.
That's so weird. Do you ask her about it, or are you just like...
Yeah. I think that I don't know what we said to her at that time. I think we pretty much kept up, like, we would gently probe, like, do you see anything, you know, like, whatever. But we pretty much would tell her, like, how to protect herself. Right. Like, I would tell her, if you count your friends, if you are feeling scared, you can count your friends, you can always call for me or whatever. Nothing can touch you, nothing can hurt you. Yeah.
That's pretty...
Yeah, it was funny.
That gave me a shock.
It was, it was really, really wild. And then, so this was kind of wild. This was another night that Mark was traveling. How convenient for me, right? That there's no one there
and for
to
him.
Sit. Right? So Francis was with me, and we were sitting at the table. This was around that same time. It was that fall that the same thing with the grill happened. And we were sitting, and we used to play this game where, like, to get her to eat. Yeah. Because I don't do anything that I should, I guess, promote healthy eating. I would just bribe her by blowing out a candle every time she took a bite. Okay. So I had, like, a candelabra that had 5 candles on it. And I'd light all 5 candles. Yeah. And every time she took a bite, blowing out. Yeah. And she loved it, right? And so I was sitting there feeding her, and we were on the last candle. Mm-hmm. And she took a bite. I turned, she blew the candle out, and I turned back to Francis, and I gave her another bite. And then I looked back, and the candle was lit again. And I was like, that's weird. Maybe I didn't blow it out, right? So I blew it out again, and I watched it go out and relight itself. It was wild.
And eventually, you just blew it out, and it stopped eventually, obviously.
Yeah, it stopped. That was the last time. And I tried to do it, right? I tried to recreate it. Like, I tried to hypothesize and, like, put on my fucking goggles and, like, test tubes or whatever. Yeah. And, like, test it and try to get it. I could not get it. I could not get it to do it again. So I looked it up, and I learned that it does happen if the smoke is hot enough. It can travel back down, and it can relight the candle. So, you know, maybe there's a logical explanation for that one. Alan, I'll give you that. But I, again, tried to recreate it so many times. I put the wind in different directions, right? I lit it in different places. I challenge you to try to do it. Twice in a row it happened. So it's really weird.
And the stairs. Tell me about the stairs.
So this is the most recent thing.
And how long ago are we talking?
Like 2 months, probably.
Are you nervous about us doing this now that it's gonna...
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So the first thing was the shushing. That happened. That kind of started it again. So Willie woke up really early one morning.
Your son?
Yeah, he woke up at like 5. And we went downstairs together, and he was just being rowdy. Like, he was just being crazy, yelling, screaming, and it was so early. And I don't want to do it because it makes me look ridiculous, but somebody shushed us, like, just really, really loud in our ear, out of nowhere, right in my ear. Shh. It was really strange.
That's actually something. So we've stayed at a few different like haunted hotels. Yeah. And that's like a recurring theme in haunted hotels. Like, there's one, the Algonquin Hotel in New York, which is a really interesting, cool historic hotel. But one of the things is that they believe the ghost of Dorothy Parker, for whatever reason, is there because she spent a lot of her time there, and that whenever there's like big groups of kids, they always report hearing the shush. Yeah.
that, I mean, yeah. So I was sort of just like, okay, like, message received, but, you know,
keep it down. It's
not
house.
really your business, but I agree. I happen to agree at that time. But so then a couple weeks after that, I had a friend come stay. I had like a party and my friend Allison came to stay. And whenever people stay at the house, I just give them I prep them.
Yeah.
Not that you're going to experience anything. You're probably not.
Yeah.
But if you wake up feeling scared, just do a quick visualization of like a ball of light surrounding you, and you're going to find like immediate peace. You'll be fine. If you just do that and maybe say a like quick incantation, like a little love and light, and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
So I told her that.
Advice. Yeah.
I told her that before she slept at the house with her husband. And I didn't give her that much detail about why. I just told her it's haunted. So just say a little something.
Yeah.
And she woke up the next morning and she said something was running up and down the stairs all night. And I said, okay, well, I didn't tell you this when you first said you were going to stay, but like 2 weeks earlier, Frances had said that she had woken up in the night. And I said, why did you wake up last night? And she said, oh, I woke up and the way her bed is positioned, she could like sit up and see the stairs to our room. She said, I woke up and I looked at the stairs and the light was on and there was a man standing at the stairs and he had no shirt on and he was looking up at your room, and it was really scary.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All very intense, and again, the thing with the friend coming in, it's like another person who's experiencing it and reporting back.
Yeah. I think the biggest, maybe not a theory, but like a takeaway I have is like there's like layers of energy at this house, and it really does feel like it's just one of those places that's thinner.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
I've had that experience in a few places, but I go to a lot of cemeteries.
Yeah.
And there's one particular cemetery in Stratford where, weirdly, I have family. Like, my earliest ancestor that migrated here is buried. The earliest Beardsley. And there's something about that cemetery where I have that feeling. Like, not in any other one, but there it's just like something is thinner. There's like some excess energy that I can feel that I can't feel in other places. And I don't think I have like, like I'm not a medium or a clairvoyant, but it's just like it's obvious, you know. It's clear that.
And I think I felt that way when I first walked into this. Actually, I didn't even think about this, but the first time that when I came to see the house, I said to the realtor, I said it feels like a religious place here, because something about the way the light was like shining through the windows, it felt like a cathedral. I was like, it just feels really like, I don't know, feels like really.
And it sounds like it
and was. It was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is really strange. So
what are your thoughts on, like, you're staying, you don't have plans to leave, and you're just dealing with it as it comes? Is that sort of your philosophy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing about it actually feels like we were saying earlier, it feels really like it's given me like a sense of like infinity. And like really, it gives me a lot of comfort, weirdly enough, because I don't think that I truly believed that death isn't the end. Yeah. Which who knows really what does that even mean? Yeah. But it does feel like, oh, if there's so much more that we don't see, and I feel like there's proof of that here. Yeah. And that's comforting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel the same way, and I think that's why when you have movements like the spiritualism movement right after the Civil War, like in some ways people are looking for that validation, and it's like can be a thin line when people are looking for it versus when it falls into your lap, and that's when it's powerful, right? Yeah. Well, thank you for talking to us and bringing us into your home and inviting us to look at it and learn about it.
It was my pleasure.
Do you feel like anything has ever followed you outside of the house?
I felt like the whistling kind of, that was like really the only thing. Yeah. Otherwise, it doesn't feel that way. Yeah.
It feels contained.
No, but when I've talked with other people about, like I have this friend, Ian, who's so skeptical. And right after the green smoke thing happened, I was in D.C. staying with him, and I was telling him about it, and he was like, bullshit, whatever. And then I was like, well, have you ever seen a ghost before, Ian? And he was like, yeah, I have. And I was like, what did it look like? He was like, it's fucking green smoke, bitch. Okay, it was the same thing that you saw. He was so mad. I was like, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
This is like, as much as you could say it's like, you know, like a psychotic episode or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Even if it's a collective unconscious, like it's some sort of energy level that we're all drawing from, it's still evidence that there's more than what we understand, you know, consciously.
Yeah.
For me, I don't know, it felt like it all makes sense to me in my head.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I understand more like what the layers of consciousness are and then how to access those layers.
Yeah, that's cool.
Like even they say, okay, the way that I think about it is like, well, you have wakefulness.
Yeah.
And you have sleeping, dreaming, lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
Sleep paralysis, astral projection.
Yeah.
Like remote viewing.
Yeah.
Like it layer, you know, I don't know. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. So one thing I want to tell you.
Yeah.
We have an episode where it's not my story to share, but I'm going to share it with you.
Yeah.
An episode of the Lunatics Radio, our podcast, fairly recent, where we interview Lindsay Brisbane of the Chilling podcast. Okay. And so her podcast is like this 13-part series where she claims she lived in the most haunted house in America. It's like in Kent, Ohio.
Okay.
And the thing I want to say is because she told a story to us on the podcast about how her and her friends, it was like I think they lived there like during college, right? So her and her friends are on the couch, they're watching Amityville Horror, some kind of movie. Yeah. Horror movie. And in the outside there was like a deck and like a sliding glass door. Yeah. They could see green smoke. Yeah. Coming up. And it like came up and like went around the house. Yeah. And they all just fled. Yeah. And like her story goes on and on. Like there's a lot of
and energy attracts like energy.
Yeah.
So I've stopped consuming true crime. Completely. Yeah. Which, you know, I love true crime.
I do.
I'll listen to last podcast when it's like history related. Yeah. Or when it's like paranormal related. Yeah. But if it's violent in any way, or if there's that darkness to it, I thought for a while I should give it up because just like ethically I felt like I should give it up, but it changed for me and I realized like, all right, I'm inviting this into my energy, and I'm like one of those energy level people. Like I really believe that shit, and what you put out there, you attract. So if you're watching Amityville Horror, I've stopped. I don't watch slasher movies anymore. Yeah, I used to fucking love them, like Halloween and Friday the 13th. Yeah. That was my shit. Like I absolutely loved it, and I don't consume it at all anymore.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
And it makes sense that she would. Yeah, the green smoke thing, it's fucking weird.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've heard other, like theories about, you know, like, history being a hologram. Yeah. You know, it's all in the atmosphere around us, and when the light hits it a certain way, you can see it. Yeah. And sometimes I believe that, too, right? Yeah. Like, if it's a certain time that you're just seeing what was there. I don't know.
Yeah, like an echo or an imprint. Yeah. Yeah. And we also talked about this a little bit before, but I truly believe, and I've said this 100 times on the podcast, but like the idea that how would you explain physics to a cockroach? Yeah. So how do we expect to understand things that are just so far beyond? Yeah. You know, which again gives us hope and is exciting and like is intriguing. Yeah. But I also don't expect that, despite the fact that we're interviewing, you know, that we want to like understand people's stories, that we're just accepting them as your stories, and that we don't need to like categorize it in a certain way or give any sort of like, you know, ruling on it. Right. It's your story, you know. So thank you for sharing it.
Yeah. Just one more thought on that. Yeah. Because you made me think of this. Like, I think everybody has had an experience, even if it's not like this. Like, if you've ever had a dream where you've known intuitively that the person you were talking to was not like, if you've ever been visited by a loved one in a dream, right? Yeah. Sometimes, I don't know if this happened to me before, right? My cousin died. My cousin took his life a couple of years ago, and he visits me in my dreams. Like, and when I look at him, I'm like, you're not in my subconscious. Yeah. You are real. Like, you're in this other world, this other plane that I'm accessing here in this different level of consciousness. And I really think that if you, I don't know, it's like that, this is like a religious thing, and I'm not religious, but they like, you know, that the way that you see yourself or the potential you see in yourself, God sees a completely different level of potential. And I do kind of believe that, like, just like human potential, it's not about technology, or it's about spirituality, and it's about consciousness and finding ways to access deeper levels of consciousness, finding ways to access, even if you have access to your intuition, that's a level of consciousness that you have to cultivate and that you have to practice. And you may not have had an experience with ghosts, but you've had an experience where like you intuitively knew something, right? Or whatever it is.
It's like the thing where like people can say every day, trust your gut, and it's not, no one questions it. Right. But the second someone's like, oh, but maybe I saw this, it's like, oh, you're crazy. But it's like just the idea of trusting your gut, it's like a little bit like ethereal. It's like a little bit like,
it is.
You know?
Yeah. It's like the first layer of clairvoyance, or like, you know, being a psychic is just being able to trust your intuition.
Totally.
Yeah. And there's this great story. I'll give you a copy of the book because I always have an extra copy to give. I love that. Called Women Who Run with the Wolves.
Oh, yeah.
You know it?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know the story of Baba Yaga?
Yeah.
With the little intuition doll, right? Like you have to feed it in order for it to grow in strength. And that's what I feel like that's true for like your levels of consciousness. You have to feed it. You can't
you
starve
have to,
it if you And how limiting to be like, we don't, this is it. How boring.
Yeah. I'd much rather choose to live in a world where I'm open to more things than where I'm closed off to them.
Yeah. Cool.
Yay. Grace, thank you so much for generously welcoming us into your home, for telling us these stories. They are making me think about things in a new way. So I appreciate that. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you want more haunted history, you can listen to the Lunatics Radio Hour podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, bye. Thanks for listening. If you'd like some bonus content, consider supporting us on Patreon to access our patron-exclusive podcast, Horror Movie Club.
Also, head to lunaticsproject.com to check out our spooky merch and apparel.
You can find us at Lunatics Project on Twitter and TikTok, and The Lunatics Project on Instagram and YouTube, where you'll find our short horror films, cemetery tours, and so much more.
And please rate and review. A little feedback goes a long way to help us grow and get more content out there.
Our cover art is by Pilar Kep, and musical bumpers are by Michaela Papa and Jordan Moser.